Good Sunday evening. I'm Anna Palmer, a founder of Punchbowl News, and welcome to our Sunday Look Ahead show. I think I'm going to be joined by fellow Punchbowl founder John Bresnahan. He's been having a little bit of a technical difficulty, but this week we are joined by Susan Page of USA Today. Susan has covered a half dozen White House administrations, more than a handful of presidential elections, and interviewed at least 9 presidents. Her first book was a biography of former First Lady Barbara Bush, and we are thrilled that she's joining us as she begins the launch around her next biography of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, titled Nancy Pelosi and the Lessons of Power. You can pre-order the book on Amazon or at any of your local booksellers. So typically, we start these Sunday shows talking about the week ahead, but at the end of every month, we host a book club where we talk to an author about their book, politics, and much more. And as always, we want to get you into the conversation, so please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and I will try and get to those throughout the conversation as well. And as always, please feel free to share or tweet about tonight's conversation. We're on all social media platforms at punchbowl.news. And with that, Susan, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, Anna, I'm so glad to be here for the very first conversation about Madam Speaker, which I've been working on for a couple of years. And congratulations to you and Jake and Brez for the amazing Punchbowl News. In a few months has become totally essential reading. I read it every morning to find out what's going on.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And yes, congratulations. We're thrilled to be the first, kind of in this weird pandemic world, conversation about the book that comes out. Tell us again exactly what day, pre-order, all the good stuff.
It comes out, the pub date is April 20th. And so we haven't, I actually have not yet seen an actual physical copy of the book. I think that it arrived in the warehouse for 12 Books, my publisher, on Friday, and they have promised they are sending me some. So I'm really looking forward to actually seeing it and putting it in my hands.
There's nothing like that physical moment where you see, because let's take a little bit of a step back. There's so much I want to talk about, because Nancy Pelosi is obviously someone I've covered throughout my whole career. We spent a ton of time thinking about power in Washington, which obviously your book is about. But maybe peel back the curtain a little bit about the process, because it's not like typically you and I write a story, it goes up and it's edited and, kind of move on to the next thing. This is a much longer process.
It is. And it's more perilous in a way, because I signed a contract to write the book with no guarantee from Nancy Pelosi that she would cooperate.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, I'd interviewed her occasionally over the years for USA Today, and I thought it was likely she would cooperate to some degree, but I didn't know how much. And I went to the first interview I had with her, and I go into the speaker's office, and she offers me, she serves those Dove ice cream bars, right? Which was, of course, she does actually, it is true that she lives on chocolate mostly. And I take a bite into this ice cream bar, and little shards of dark chocolate scatter all over her pristine carpet. And so there I am with the Speaker of the House, desperately trying to pick up chocolate shards off her rug. And I'm thinking she is never going to do a second interview. And she did do a second interview. She did 10 interviews with me and all, but never again did she serve anything to eat.
It was done. It was a one and done. She caught you and you were flat-footed, so you weren't going to ask too hard of questions as you're just trying to pick it all up. I can't even imagine. I want to just ask, John Bresnahan, are you on the phone?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome to the conversation.
Oh my God. Technology. I'm going to kill Zoom. Susan, I am so sorry. I can't see you. I was so excited about this because I, of course, like you and Ian, have covered Pelosi forever. And the idea of you getting 10 interviews with Pelosi, when you say 10 interviews, how much time was that altogether?
Well, each of them was about an hour. They weren't supposed to be an hour. She always gave me a little more time than had been scheduled, or maybe that was just a device. I don't know. But I thought it was a fair amount of time. And one thing that I appreciated was, these interviews, of course, would be scheduled well in advance. One of them took place the day the whole squad controversy blew up. One of them took place the day the impeachment hearings began in the House. And she went ahead and did the interviews, which I thought was pretty gracious of her. She was She was pretty cooperative. She didn't make other people talk to me, but she didn't tell other people not to talk to me, which people can sometimes do when you're trying to do a profile or a book about them or a biography. So I have no complaints. One other interesting thing about her, she never put a single thing off the record. And that is,
Wow.
that is something that is, as you both know, unusual with Washington Pauls. She talked on the record. She's not, I think, going to be delighted with every single thing in the book, but she never tried to say you can't write that.
Wow.
I want to take
That's
a step
amazing.
back. Can I, and then because I'll let you run. It's a little harder because we're doing it on a call-in basis, but I want to just, because we kind of didn't even get into how you picked Nancy Pelosi, right? You had done a book, a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it, about Barbara Bush. Very revealing, very popular. She controversial in some ways. Was some of the things that she ended up kind of talking to you about. But what made it say, okay, I'm going to go from, former first lady to Nancy Pelosi, this moment? Why?
So of course they're very different. The two of them, they're different parties, they're different roles. One's the spouse, the other's been the principal in politics. But there are ways in which their stories appeal to me in the same way, in that I thought both of them were very consequential. They had a big impact on our country, and that they were underestimated. I think Nancy Pelosi, one characteristic of her career has been that she has been underestimated by almost everybody. And that became a little less so once Donald Trump was elected president. She became the Democratic counterpart to him. But I'll tell you, when she was first elected speaker, and of course, she was the first woman ever to achieve that role. Time Magazine, which she has been devoted to since she was in high school, she's always been an avid reader of Time Magazine. Time Magazine never put her on the cover. And then she gets replaced by John Boehner, and they instantly put him on the cover with a headline, Mr. Speaker. And that is something that I think she remembers, but I think it's kind of emblematic of the way both she and Barbara Bush were treated. And so in that way, they were appealing. One other thing I didn't know when I started the Nancy Pelosi book is that she and Barbara Bush were friends. And I didn't realize that. There's a picture of Nancy Pelosi with the Bush family in her office. And she told me that she went to do a speech at the Bush Library as a kind of a favor for George H.W. and Barbara Bush, which had turned out caused some controversy there because Nancy Pelosi is not a figure who's revered by those who are devoted to the Bush Library in College Station, Texas. And when she arrived, pulled up the steps and came up the steps, Barbara Bush came out to meet her and said, "I'm so sorry, I have to apologize. I'm sorry we couldn't get more protesters here to greet you," because there was only a small group of protesters there. They had a friendly, interesting, kind of unexpected friendship.
That's very interesting.
Can I ask, I've covered Pelosi for a long time. I think Pelosi is probably she's the best vote counter I've ever seen. And frankly, there's nobody I ever covered who could have gone through what she went through in 2010. They lost 63 seats and she survived and she became speaker again. It's a remarkable story. Why is she the only woman to ever become speaker? What is the secret of her success?
So I think that people pay too much attention to her groundbreaking quality in terms of gender, because she's just a Paul. She is she knows how to get power, how to keep power, and how to use power. And she has this, amazing family story with her father. Her father, who was kicked out of St. Leo's parochial school at age 13, never went back to school, became a 5-term member of Congress, a 3-term mayor of Baltimore, and and she was his adorable sidekick for most of her childhood. A series of things, boats and planes and other things in Baltimore were named after little Nancy D'Alessandro when she was very accustomed to being in the public eye. But Brez, I have to say that, of course, I tried to read everything I could that had been written about Nancy Pelosi. And the single best description of Nancy Pelosi was in a piece that you wrote for Politico in 2010. Do you remember what you described her as?
Yeah, I did. I said it was an iron fist and a Gucci glove. Yeah.
An iron fist.
I was very proud of that line. And it's true. But I do think I understand what you're saying. But also, I mean, listen, this is a woman who had 5 children and had this whole career as a mother before she became a politically active, and then and really, started as an activist first. And people forget that.
Well, but first of all, iron fist and a Gucci glove. Let no one forget that. I use it over and over again in the book. I always credit it to you, but it is the description of Nancy Pelosi that most applies. Here's something that's interesting. She had this amazing father. She also had this amazing mother, who was Big Nancy D'Alessandro, who was a political force behind the scenes for her husband throughout his political career. And one of the theories in my book is that until she was 46 years old, she was her mother, because she was very active in politics. She was chair of the California State Democratic Party. She was the chairman of the hometown chairman of the Democratic National Convention in 1984. She was a big figure in Jerry Brown's presidential campaign. But when she was 46 years old, and there was suddenly this opening for the congressional seat in San Francisco when her friend Sally Burton died, she became her father. She went from being the figure behind the throne who was really working politics in a sophisticated way to the candidate herself. And she had really been, I think, prepared for that by this remarkable history that she had.
Talk a little bit about the title says Lessons of Power. I'd be really interested to get it that, I mean, we've both covered her for so long and kind of seen, to your point, I always agree with you. I think people underestimate Nancy Pelosi at their own peril, always. Right? Over and over and over, she outperforms beyond everyone's expectations. But what lessons of power do you see that she's gotten? And I also think, can you talk a little bit about the generational issues? I mean, she's obviously an octogenarian. There's this younger generation of women coming up. How do you think she wields power differently based on kind of age and also that background that you just spoke about?
Yeah. So first, to talk about lessons of power, the book went through several titles. First, it was Nancy Pelosi and the Arc of Power, and then it was Nancy Pelosi and the Tests of Power. And finally, the one that's on the cover of the book, let's assume I eventually get a copy of the book, is Nancy Pelosi and the Lessons of Power, because she very much learned lessons of power from her father, Tommy the Elder D'Alessandro, from her mother, Big Nancy D'Alessandro, from her mentor, Lindy Boggs, the late Congresswoman from Louisiana, and from the only race she ever lost, which was when she ran for Democratic National Chairman in 1984. And I'd say the number one lesson of power that she took was, no one is going to give you power. You have to take it. That was true for her father. Her father got first elected to Congress by ousting in a Democratic primary a 6-term incumbent. I mean, that is seizing power. And you saw her do that again when she challenged Steny Hoyer, who everybody thought was going to be the next Democratic whip. She waged a 3-year campaign against Steny Hoyer to become Democratic whip and put her on the path to be speaker.
Yeah, let's talk about that relationship with Hoyer, because it's a fascinating relationship. They've known each other for 40 odd years, and there was a rivalry for a long time, like you said, and covered the 2001 and 2002 race when they were looking to replace, Gephardt was going to run for president, and whoever became whip was going to be the next Democratic leader, and it was the fight for that made her. She beat Hoyer pretty convincingly. What is the relationship like between those two?
So, Brez, I can tell you that no one in Washington, among Washington types, no issue has been raised with me more often than what's the deal between Pelosi and Hoyer. And so, it's not the most important thing, but it is something that has been the subject of incredible speculation. So I actually spent a lot of time looking at that. So they met when both were hired by Senator Brewster, who was a senator from Maryland. And stories often describe them as interns. That is incorrect. They were both hired as regular staffers. I looked at the Senate employment records. Here's something interesting. They were both just getting out of college. He was hired as a clerk. She was hired as a receptionist. He was on a path to deal with legislation. She was not. She got paid more. She had a notably
Wow.
higher salary than Steny Hoyer. And when I told her that, she told me it couldn't possibly be true. And I said, well, I went and looked at the Senate records, and she said, no, that can't be true. She refused to believe she'd been paid more than Steny Hoyer, but she was. And again, neither of them were interns. Some people say they must have dated when they were both working
Right.
in Brewster's office. I don't think that is correct, because Steny Hoyer had just gotten married. Nancy D'Alessandro had just gotten engaged. I don't think it makes sense that they, at first, there's no
Right.
evidence that they dated. I think people just made that up. I can't, after doing a lot of research, I think the reason they've had this rivalry, which has been bitter at times, not so bitter now, but in years past
Right.
has been bitter, is because they both wanted the same job and one of them got it.
We are getting a couple of questions here in the Q&A that I want to get to. One being something that Brez and I speak about all the time, which is, when will Nancy Pelosi go? Will she retire? Do you have any insight from these 10 interviews, or just in talking to folks? I mean, a lot of speculation that this will be her last, potential, term. I
believe this will be her last term. She made a commitment to that effect in 2018. And offered to have it written into the Democratic rules. In fact, it was never written into the Democratic rules, but it's still something that she made a commitment to, that this would be her last term. She would have to win this term by a bigger margin, not just by majority, and that she would, and that it would be the last time she would be service as speaker. And when at the beginning of this term, she has avoided making that statement flatly so that you could pull the clip that says, this is my last term. But she has said, I recognize the commitment I made last time around. I also think it is probably the cold-hearted judgment that it's time for her to step down. She's 81 years old. She just had her birthday last week. As you know, all three of the top leaders for the House Democrats are really up there. There is a big sentiment for generational change in the House, and which I think she recognizes. So I believe that this is going to be her last term. Although it's true that she's been careful not to say that in kind of a flat way, and there are those who think she will never leave. But I think this is probably her last term. I want to get one more audience question, and then Brez, I'll go to you. But Lynn asks, and I think this is to your point, which is interesting, the kind of this push-pull for generational change, but asks, how did Pelosi win over the new members in 2018 who had publicly stated they were going to vote for someone else as speaker? I talked to Jason Crow about that, because the Colorado congressman, because he was running to flip a seat in Colorado. He had said publicly he wouldn't vote for Pelosi as speaker. He actually told me he called Pelosi the day before. He'd never met her, but called her as a courtesy to say, by the way, tomorrow I'm going to say I'll vote for you as speaker. And she took it, she understood the politics of why he would do that. He then gets elected. She invites him to come to meet with her in the speaker's office. So he comes and meets her, and she says, congratulations on getting elected. I hope you'll support me for speaker. And he said, no, I can't do that. I said I wouldn't, and I won't. And he says that he didn't give me a lot of details from that meeting, but he said that it wasn't basically any fun to have this conversation with her. But then look, she then puts him as one of the impeachment managers, which was a huge plum. And they have a good relationship now. So that tells you about Nancy Pelosi. He crossed her in a way. She understood why. She went ahead and built a relationship with him, gave him this big job. And I think they now have an especially good relationship. She's done that she's made efforts, sophisticated efforts with almost every member of her caucus.
It's so funny you tell a story, because we were covering in 2018, one of the big issues was, how many Democrats are not going to vote for her. And after the election, I think 16 of them got on a letter and were like, oh my God, all the reporters were like, oh my God, it's 16 members. And Pelosi was like, oh, it's only 16 members. Her whole thinking was so different. She said, oh, 16, that's easy. Like, she had it. Like, they were worried it was going to be 25, and then she'd have a real problem, but it was so, we're freaking out, and they're like, oh, it's 16. She's got it. That's it. Because she'll get a couple of them here and there, and she got Marcia Fudge, and she got some other ones, but it was so amazing. Can we talk a minute? It's, to me, these two the iconic figures. You have Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, and they're of course, totally different. And in some ways, they're so alike. And I mean, to me, the thing that strikes me about both of them is they're kind of, I don't know how else to say it. I've been thinking about this all day. Is like, they're kind of fearless. They're kind of like, they know what they want and they go after it. And I just wondered if you thought about the parallels with McConnell and of course the differences and you know, they're similar in age and they're similar in experience and similar in leadership time. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
So nothing Nancy Pelosi would like less to hear than you
I
compare
know.
her to Mitch McConnell,
Right.
because they do not have a good relationship, but they're both
No.
extremely effective. And you know, there's another quality they share, which is they also don't care if they get criticized. I mean,
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell, of course, she criticizes him as Moscow Mitch because she knows it gets under his skin. Has anybody been demonized more than Nancy Pelosi? And
Right.
both of them have not let that keep them from holding their caucus together. And they have, both of them have held their caucuses together. This is no small feat. She's held this caucus
Right.
together when it includes both these majority makers who flipped Republican seats
Right.
to the squad, and yet she maintained
Right.
the same percentage of achievement in holding the caucus together on big votes. It's really remarkable. But I would, if you were in her presence, I would not say, gee, there are a lot of things between you and Mitch McConnell that remind me of each other.
I've actually said it to her, and you know, and she said something. Well, she said she was funny the other day because she said during a press conference she was like, she was pretending, she doesn't like, she's pissed at somebody, she'll forget their name on purpose, and she said, "Well, Senator, what's his name, McConnell," you know, which was, you know, they've served in Congress, you know, for 30 odd years each, so it's pretty funny to see it.
You know, that is such a Pelosi tell. It is
Yeah,
definitely something she
exactly.
does when she wants to diss somebody, like Mark
Yeah.
Meadows. Now he was a 5-term congressman. Okay, she knows Mark Meadows' name, and she couldn't seem to remember Mark Meadows' names, and finally called him the staffer. I mean, because he had become White House chief of staff.
Yeah.
Loved it.
I mean, that is really, you know, Pelosi is sending a message if she doesn't remember your name.
I love
Yeah.
it. So we have a couple more questions here from the audience. Robert wants to know, is the speaker really irritated by the squad?
I would say the answer to that is yes.
Wow.
All right, short answer to
And
that one.
for only like
You want to, yeah, you got to
$25.99,
develop that
you
a
can
little
buy
bit
a
more,
book.
Susan. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can buy a book and it will tell you more about that.
I love that. All right, a
Well, that's
cliffhanger.
great. Good way to sell, Susan.
We have another question. I think this is a great question because I'd be interested in the answer. Is who was the most interesting non-Pelosi interviewee you did for the book?
Oh, interesting. So Pelosi was good. Obama was good. Obama, you know, President Obama, I guess I should call him President Obama. President Obama and Pelosi have a very good relationship, a great debt. Neither the Affordable Care Act wouldn't have passed without each of them being in the place they was, but they were sometimes at odds with each other. So President Obama, that was an interesting interview. You know, John Burton was a good interview. He's such a character for one thing, but he was also there at the beginning and a skeptic about Nancy Pelosi when she first ran for the House. So he was good. Harry Reid, I went out to Las Vegas and interviewed Harry Reid, and Harry Reid is somebody who, if you ask the question, he'll answer it. So he was also, those were 3 interviews I really enjoyed doing. And one other, Anna Eshoo, the congresswoman who is very close to Pelosi personally. She gave me some insights into Nancy Pelosi. I think wouldn't have understood otherwise. I'm, you know, nobody owes you. You don't have subpoena power as a reporter or as a biographer. Sadly, I don't know what the founders were thinking not to give that to us. So anybody who talks to you, it's voluntary. And I am really indebted to the people who were willing to talk to me.
Did you talk to the former President Donald Trump?
I sought to talk to him, but it was during impeachment and we never worked that out. Maybe I'll try to talk to him now that he's doing interviews again. I actually talked to him about Pelosi before I was writing the book in 2018, I did an interview with President Trump for USA Today with my colleague David Jackson, and we talked about Pelosi because this was just before the midterm elections, in which he seemed very confident that they would be able to make deals and get things done. He did not share the alarm of some on his staff about the prospect of a Democratic majority in the House. And I think on that, he turned out to be incorrect.
Braz, I'm going to give you the last question here.
I'm fascinated. I think this is all tremendous stuff. And you talked about the relationship with Obama, which I thought was interesting because at first he didn't like her or they butted heads a little bit because she lectured him and he's the president of the United States, but that's who Nancy Pelosi is. And I really hope that you can talk to Trump. That's fascinating. Where should we, and I know this is such a big question, but where should we put Nancy Pelosi in terms of American political landscape? How should we think of her? When she's gone, there'll never be another one like her, I believe. But, what should we think about her? Who would you compare her to if there's anybody you could compare her to?
Well, I think it is undeniable that she is the most consequential Speaker of the House since Sam Rayburn. She's right. Someone, and she's done that. She's like Sam Rayburn. She won the leadership of Democrats in the minority, right. Held it in the majority, held it in the minority, held it back in the majority again. Nobody's done that since Rayburn. And she's done it with a political landscape that is just so much more difficult. There's so much more money involved. There's so much, social media is so powerful. Our politics is so much more polarized. For her to do that is a remarkable achievement. I also think that it's hard to compare. The role of Speaker of the House has changed. It's gotten bigger and smaller and bigger again over the years. But I think it is undeniable that she will be seen as one of the most effective and consequential, one of the most important Speakers of the House in American history.
Susan, before we let you go, I want to tell the title one more time where people can buy it. And then we're kind of doing like the rollout. So when will you start doing events? What should people be focused on when they can hear from you, see you again?
Well, so the first excerpt will run in USA Today, and it's now planned for April 14th. And then the publication date is April 20th. And thank you very much for providing such a great launch for this book.
Of course, we'll buy it at Amazon or whatever local bookstore you buy your books at. Susan, we really appreciate you for joining us for this week's look ahead, the book club that we do once a month. We are going to come out next week with our next book, which we're very excited about. So look for an announcement middle of next week. Otherwise, please, you can always find us at punchbowl.news. Have a safe night and a great weekend. Take care.